Disclaimer: this story contains mature themes intended for adult viewers. Viewer discretion is advised. I was lying quietly in my room, the kind of silence that makes you aware of every breath you take, when the door eased open without a sound. She didn't say a word, just slipped inside and crossed the room like she belonged there. Before I could even ask why, she lowered herself onto the bed, so close I could feel the warmth of her body against mine. The mattress dipped, and my heartbeat stumbled. Her shoulder brushed mine, accidental, or maybe not, and for a moment the air thickened, heavy with something unspoken. I dared a glance at her face, and that's when her eyes found mine. There was no smile, no words, only the kind of look that lingers longer than it should, daring me to hold it. I swallowed, my mouth suddenly dry. The space between us felt smaller than it was, her breath so close it brushed my cheek. My nerves lit up like sparks racing under my skin, and I couldn't decide if I wanted to pull back or lean closer. She tilted slightly, as if testing me, the faintest curve of her lips betraying a tease I wasn't prepared for. The silence pressed in harder. My pulse drummed in my ears, each second louder than the last. I thought about saying something, anything, but the words tangled before they reached my lips. Her hand shifted against the blanket, resting just near mine, close enough that the tiniest movement could close the gap. And in that fragile stillness, where every breath carried weight, I realized something undeniable, something had already changed between us. Then, without warning, she whispered my name, and everything inside me froze. The rest I'll let you see for yourself. Disclaimer: this story contains mature themes intended for adult viewers. Viewer discretion is advised. The silence between us lingered long after she whispered my name, but it wasn't an ordinary silence. It was heavy, loaded, like there were whole conversations we had never dared to speak. I felt her shift slightly closer, not enough to call it obvious, but enough to make my pulse race faster than it should. It wasn't the first time I had felt it, the subtle cracks in the walls we built around ourselves. For weeks, maybe longer, there had been little moments. A glance that lasted longer than necessary. A smile that carried more than politeness. A touch that should have been casual, but left me replaying it long after. She had a way of stepping into my space without warning, and I had a way of never pulling back. But neither of us ever acknowledged it. Maybe we were afraid of what it meant, or maybe afraid of what it would change. The truth is, things at home hadn't been simple. Behind closed doors, love wasn't always gentle. Words sometimes cut deeper than they should, and feelings were buried instead of spoken aloud. Loneliness crept into the quiet nights, leaving empty spaces where warmth should have been. And somehow, she had noticed. She always noticed. That's what made her different. She saw me when others didn't. She listened, even when I hadn't spoken. She had this way of making silence feel like safety, of making me feel seen without a single word. But with every moment, the line between comfort and desire blurred. Sitting too close, laughing too much, the way her eyes softened when they met mine, it wasn't supposed to mean more. Yet it did. Now, lying side by side in the dim glow of my room, the distance between us felt thinner than ever. Her hand shifted slightly, brushing the fabric near mine. I froze, pretending not to notice, but the heat of it burned through me. A breath escaped my lips, uneven, shaky. She must have heard it, because her lips curved, the faintest trace of a knowing smile. The tension wasn't loud. It was quiet, subtle, the kind that hums beneath the surface until it becomes impossible to ignore. My mind screamed at me to move, to speak, to do anything to break the spell. But my body stayed still, caught in the pull of hers. Unspoken truths hovered in the air, secrets neither of us had the courage to confess. Maybe this was wrong. Maybe it was only loneliness drawing us together. Or maybe, just maybe, it was something we had both been waiting for without ever admitting it. And as the silence deepened, her eyes searched mine with a question she didn't dare to ask out loud. I held my breath, wondering if I could answer it without saying a single word. Disclaimer: this story contains mature themes intended for adult viewers. Viewer discretion is advised. The longer we stayed in that silence, the more dangerous it became. Every second stretched out like it carried a secret neither of us was brave enough to say. She shifted on the bed, her arm brushing mine, and I felt the spark ripple through me, small, but impossible to ignore. Her eyes searched me, steady and unflinching, as though daring me to look away first. I didn't. I couldn't. That look carried something deeper, something she shouldn't have been giving me, something I shouldn't have been craving. And then, almost without meaning to, she asked, "Do you ever wonder what it would feel like, if things were different?" Her words hit harder than they should have. My breath caught, my chest tightening. Was it a game? Was she teasing? Or was it the truth slipping out? I wanted to ask, but the way her lips curved, half playful, half serious, kept me still. Temptation hung between us like a storm waiting to break. My heart raced at the thought, at the closeness, at the idea that I wasn't the only one fighting something inside. The way she lingered in my room, the way she leaned just close enough, it was too much to be innocent. And yet, there was another layer beneath it all, jealousy. I had noticed it before, in the way her eyes followed me when I laughed with someone else, or how her mood shifted when my attention drifted away. Subtle, sharp, always hidden beneath a smile that tried too hard. Now, that jealousy simmered in her voice, soft but biting. "You don't look at anyone else the way you look at me," she whispered. She was right. And she knew it. The confession lodged in my throat, unspoken but obvious in the way my pulse quickened, in the way my gaze refused to leave hers. I felt cornered by my own longing, by the intensity she pulled from me without even trying. The air grew heavier, like the room itself was holding its breath with us. One wrong move, one reckless choice, and everything would change. And in that moment, I realized we were already standing at the edge of something neither of us could turn back from. Disclaimer: this story contains mature themes intended for adult viewers. Viewer discretion is advised. The night grew heavier, the kind of silence that wraps itself around you and refuses to let go. The house was still, every door closed, every sound muted. It was only the two of us now, no excuses, no distractions, no one to interrupt. She leaned back against the headboard, the dim glow of the lamp catching her face in soft, golden light. Her eyes never left mine, steady and unyielding, pulling me closer without a single word. I sat at the edge of the bed, trying to keep the space between us, but the space itself felt like a lie. "Why do you keep looking at me like that?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I tried to answer, but my throat tightened. The truth would burn if I spoke it. Still, she could see it in me, the racing pulse, the restless shift of my hands, the way my gaze lingered too long. She knew. Her hand reached across the blanket, brushing against mine, not by accident this time. My chest tightened as heat rushed through me. She didn't move away. Neither did I. That single touch carried more weight than any words we had ever exchanged. The air between us grew unbearably charged. I could smell her perfume, soft, warm, familiar, and it only pulled me in deeper. My nerves buzzed with every breath, every second stretching thin as if the universe itself was holding us in place. "You feel it too," she whispered, not as a question, but as a truth she already knew. Her words left me frozen, my heart pounding so loud I was certain she could hear it. There was no running from it now. The closeness, the tension, the longing, it was all colliding in one dangerous, unstoppable moment. I leaned in without meaning to, the space between us shrinking until even the smallest movement could erase it completely. My breath brushed her lips. Her eyes fluttered, torn between hesitation and surrender. And just as the moment threatened to shatter into something irreversible, a sound echoed outside the door. Both our heads turned instantly, the spell broken but not gone. The closeness remained, the longing still burning, but the chance, the dangerous, tempting chance, hung unfinished. We didn't move. We couldn't. The door handle shifted. Everything was about to change. Disclaimer: this story contains mature themes intended for adult viewers. Viewer discretion is advised. The door handle stilled. Whoever was outside didn't enter, but the sound had already cracked the fragile moment wide open. My pulse hammered in my chest, yet neither of us moved away. We stayed locked there, too close, too aware, too far past pretending nothing was happening. She looked at me, her eyes wide, her breath shaky. For the first time, she didn't hide it, the longing, the need, the fear. It was all there, painted across her face like a confession she couldn't take back. "Say it," she whispered, her voice trembling but firm. "I need to hear you say it." The words burned inside me, the truth clawing its way out. I had spent nights burying it, convincing myself it wasn't real, that it was only a passing thought. But now, with her this close, with her hand inching over mine, I couldn't lie anymore. "I can't stop thinking about you," I admitted, my voice rough, almost broken. Her breath caught, her lips parting as if my confession had struck her like a blow. And then, without hesitation, she leaned closer, her forehead pressing softly against mine. The closeness was unbearable, our breaths tangling, our silence louder than any words. "You don't know what you've done to me," she murmured, her fingers curling against my hand at last. It was the first time we touched without restraint. The world narrowed to that single contact, to the fire that surged between us, dangerous and undeniable. My body trembled, torn between fear of what we were doing and the hunger to finally surrender. Then, just as her lips brushed mine, soft as a promise, the sound came again. A knock. Sharp, sudden, impossible to ignore. We froze, both our heads snapping toward the door. "Are you in there?" A voice called. Familiar. "Close." Her entire body tensed. Panic flashed across her face, raw and desperate. She pulled her hand back, but it was too late, the moment had already burned itself into us. The desire. The risk. The knowledge that we had crossed a line we could never uncross. "Don't answer," I whispered. Her eyes darted to mine, torn between fear and longing, between everything she wanted and everything she stood to lose. The knocking grew louder. The voice grew sharper. Whoever was on the other side wasn't leaving. And just like that, the secret we thought we could hide threatened to unravel. She leaned close, her lips brushing my ear, her voice low and urgent. "If they find out, everything changes." Her warning wasn't enough to smother the fire between us. If anything, it made it burn brighter. Because now it wasn't just desire, it was danger. And I couldn't tell if I was ready to stop. Disclaimer: this story contains mature themes intended for adult viewers. Viewer discretion is advised. The pounding on the door grew sharper, harder to ignore. Each knock was a reminder that the walls around us were too thin to hide what we had just admitted. My pulse raced, and her hand slipped from mine, though the warmth of her touch still burned against my skin. She stood abruptly, smoothing the blanket as if erasing proof of our closeness. Her face was pale, caught between fear and defiance, but her eyes flicked back to me, still heavy with the weight of what we had shared. The door creaked open before either of us could stop it. A shadow filled the frame, suspicion thick in the air. Words were exchanged, sharp, demanding, laced with accusation. "What's going on in here?" Her breath hitched, but she stepped forward, her voice steadier than I expected. "Nothing." We were just talking. It sounded thin, fragile, but she held her ground. I sat frozen on the bed, every muscle tight, fighting to keep the storm in my chest from showing on my face. The tension spiraled. Questions came faster, louder. Why the door was shut. Why she was in my room at this hour. Why our eyes looked like we had been caught in the middle of something more. I expected her to crumble. To turn away. To let the silence condemn us. But instead, she did something I never saw coming. She confessed, not all of it, but enough. Her voice cracked, heavy with emotion. You don't understand. I can't pretend anymore. The room went still. The words hung in the air like a blade waiting to drop. The one outside the door didn't speak, stunned into silence. And me, I felt my chest split open, my heart both terrified and alive in the same breath. For a moment, the world felt like it might collapse around us. But she didn't falter. She wiped at her eyes, standing taller, braver than I had ever seen her. This is my choice, she said firmly, almost defiantly. The confrontation unraveled into chaos, anger, disbelief, raised voices, but beneath it all, a strange sense of release. The secret was no longer buried. The truth had cracked open, and no matter the consequences, it was real now. Tears stung at the corners of my eyes, a mix of fear and relief. Whatever came next, we weren't hiding anymore. As the shouting quieted, the tension hung like smoke in the air. She turned back to me, her gaze trembling but unbroken. This isn't the end, she whispered, barely audible above the silence that followed. And in that moment, I knew, what we had started could never be undone. Disclaimer: this story contains mature themes intended for adult viewers. Viewer discretion is advised. The storm of voices eventually faded. The door closed, leaving the two of us alone again. The house fell quiet, but the silence wasn't the same as before. It carried the weight of everything that had been said, everything that couldn't be taken back. I sat on the edge of the bed, my chest still tight, my thoughts spiraling. She stood across from me, her back to the door, shoulders trembling. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The air was thick with fear, relief, and something deeper, something that had been fighting to break free. Finally, she turned. Her eyes shimmered with unshed tears, but there was a softness in them, a warmth that reached straight into me. She crossed the room slowly, each step careful, as though testing the ground beneath her feet. When she sat beside me, I couldn't move. My breath caught as her hand reached for mine again, this time with no hesitation. Her fingers wove through mine, firm, certain. I'm not running from this anymore, she said quietly, her voice steady but tender. Whatever comes, we'll face it together. Her words cut through the fear like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. I turned to her, searching her face, and what I saw wasn't just desire, it was love, fragile but fierce. I lifted my hand to her cheek, brushing away the tear that slipped free. She leaned into my touch, her eyes closing as if she'd been waiting for this moment just as long as I had. When our lips met, it wasn't hurried or reckless. It was slow, deliberate, filled with everything we hadn't been able to say. A kiss that wasn't just passion, but promise. A bond sealed not in secrecy, but in truth. The world outside the room was still complicated. There would be questions, struggles, maybe even judgment. But in that moment, none of it mattered. All that mattered was us, two hearts choosing each other, no matter the cost. She pulled back just slightly, her forehead resting against mine, her breath warm and steady. You make me feel alive, she whispered. I smiled, my hand still against her cheek. And I'm not letting go. The tension that had defined us for so long finally softened into something real, something lasting. No more pretending. No more fear. Just us. And as the night wrapped around us, it was clear, this wasn't the end of a secret. It was the beginning of something we both needed, something we both had finally found: love.